Ever wonder why so many gifted kids grow up paralyzed by perfectionism? The very label that once made them feel special now feels like a curse. They were called gifted, bright, exceptional. From an early age, they were the ones who stood out, aced the tests, impressed the adults, soaked up knowledge like a sponge. They were told they were special, destined for something great, but somewhere between childhood praise and adult expectations, something quietly broke. That praise, the very thing that once felt like wings, became a weight. And now, many of those same kids, the gifted ones, are struggling in silence. They can't explain why they've lost all motivation, why they feel like they're falling behind in life, even though everyone says they're doing fine. They struggle to start things, to finish them, to connect. And underneath it all is a painful, invisible truth. They don't feel alive. They feel like spectators in their own lives, watching the world move while they stay frozen. This is the hidden curse of being a gifted kid, and it has less to do with intelligence and everything to do with identity, pressure, and emotional neglect. In this video, we'll uncover how this curse forms, why it lingers for years, and how to finally break free from it before it breaks you. But why does this happen? Why do so many gifted kids, maybe you, end up feeling so disconnected and stuck? It starts with something simple, something innocent, something that was supposed to be a compliment. You are so smart. At first, that phrase feels like magic. It gives you attention, approval, a sense of identity. And let's be honest, it's powerful. Being smart meant life came easy. You understood things faster than others. You got praise without even trying. You didn't have to grind or struggle like everyone else. You were told that you were different. And for a while, that difference felt like a gift, until it didn't. See, as kids, we build our identities around whatever gets us love and recognition. Some kids cling to sports, others to humor or art. But if you were one of the smart ones, you didn't just learn fast, you became the kid who learns fast. It wasn't just something you did, it became who you were. And that's where the trap begins. Because what people were really praising wasn't your effort, it was your effortlessness. You were rewarded not for working hard, but for being quick, being correct, being exceptional, without trying. And so, deep down, you started to believe something dangerous. If I'm truly smart, then things should be easy for me. And that belief, it quietly sabotaged everything. Because eventually, life stopped being easy. School got harder. Relationships got messier. Work required more than just understanding. It needed follow-through, resilience, emotional maturity. And when things no longer came naturally, the voice in your head whispered, "If I'm smart, why am I struggling?" That struggle doesn't feel like a challenge. It feels like a threat to your identity. So, what do? You protect your identity. You avoid raising your hand unless you're sure. You don't try new things unless you're guaranteed to succeed. You stay away from anything that might expose you as not smart enough. And over time, your world starts to shrink. You stop growing. Not because you're lazy, but because you're scared. Scared of being ordinary. Scared of losing the one identity you've always known. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is out there, experimenting, failing, learning, becoming. But you're stuck inside a box that looks like safety and feels more like a cage. The gifted kid identity, once a badge of honor, has quietly become a burden, and the longer you carry it, the heavier it gets. But here's the thing you need to know. This isn't a personal flaw. It's not about weakness or failure. It's a survival strategy, one that worked for a while, but now it's holding you back. And if you can understand how that identity formed, you can begin to let it go. You don't have to live in that shrinking comfort zone forever. Here's where things get quiet and dangerous, because eventually it hits you. You've built your whole identity on something that now feels fragile. You can't fail. You can't look stupid. You can't afford to do anything that might threaten the image you spent your entire life protecting. So you stall, you wait, you hesitate, you analyze. And while you're doing all that, life keeps moving. That's when the isolation begins to creep in. But it doesn't arrive all at once. It starts subtly like background noise. You stop raising your hand. You sit out of conversations. You skip the social invite. You pass on the group project. You tell yourself you're just not in the mood. But what's really happening is you're pulling away from life itself. Because here's the truth. No one tells you when you stop growing, you also stop connecting. Real connection doesn't come from being admired. It comes from shared experiences. From trying, failing, laughing through awkward moments. It comes from being on a team, struggling through a late-night deadline, learning the ropes together even when you mess up. But when you're terrified of not being great right away, you opt out of all of that. You don't join the club because what if you suck at it? You avoid the sport because you've never played before. You turn down the invitation because you're afraid of being seen as boring or weird or just average. So you step back. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a quiet withdrawal, a slow fade. And without realizing it, you fall out of the flow of social life. Everyone else is bonding, building memories, growing, and you're on the sidelines, watching, isolated, numb. Not because you're not worthy, but because you've built a life where being seen feels too risky. And so, you stay hidden. Even though a part of you is aching to be known, that ache, that quiet loneliness that creeps in even when you're surrounded by people, that's the emotional cost of building an identity you're too afraid to outgrow. But this is where things can begin to change. Because if you can name that ache, if you can face the fear that's been running the show, then you can begin to reconnect. Not just with others, but with yourself. You still want connection. Of course you do. Even after everything, the shrinking identity, the stalled growth, the quiet loneliness, you still want to feel close to someone, to feel understood, seen, accepted. But how do you do that when being yourself feels too risky? So you do what you've always done. You fall back on the one thing you know how to trust, your intelligence. You don't feel your way into relationships. You think your way in. You observe people. You study them. You run emotional simulations in your head. If I say this, they'll probably say that. You predict their reactions, memorize social rules, try to be one step ahead in every conversation. You develop something called cognitive empathy. You understand what people feel logically, but you don't let yourself feel with them. And for a while, it works. You can hold a conversation, you can make people laugh, you might even seem charming or confident on the outside. But inside, you're tired because you're not really with people. You're managing them, calculating every word, rehearsing every move, filtering every part of yourself. And now, socializing becomes another skill you have to master. Another test you're terrified of failing, so you start avoiding it. Not because you don't care, but because it's exhausting. Every interaction feels like a performance. Every moment spent thinking, what do they want me to be right now? And slowly, that ache, the one you've been carrying, grows deeper. Because now, even when you're around people, you still feel alone. You're not being rejected. You're just never truly letting yourself be seen. This is where intelligence, your greatest strength, turns against you. Not because it's bad, but because you've used it to protect yourself from the one thing you need most. Real, messy, human connection. And connection doesn't come from being impressive. It comes from being present. It comes from putting down the armor of analysis and letting someone meet the real, imperfect you without a script. And for someone who spent a lifetime hiding behind intellect, that could be the scariest thing in the world. But you're smart, right? You've always been smart. So why can't you figure this out? Why can't you think your way out of the emptiness? So you try harder. You treat your pain like a puzzle. You apply logic to your low self-worth. You write out rational arguments to prove to yourself that you're okay. You analyze your past, dissect your personality, debate your own inner critic like it's a courtroom battle you just need to win. But nothing changes, does it? Because intelligence can do a lot of things, but it can't make you feel whole. You're using a brilliant mind to solve the problem it was never designed to fix. Because the question, am I enough, isn't a riddle to solve. It's a wound that needs to be felt. And that's the part that got skipped. For all your intelligence, for all the books, the insights, the thinking, emotional growth is the one place you were never really taught to go. So when the ache becomes too sharp, when the loneliness feels unbearable and unfixable, your mind builds one final defense: arrogance. You start telling yourself stories. I'm not lonely, I'm just different. I don't relate because they're not on my level. I'm too deep for surface friendships. But underneath that story is a much quieter truth. You feel left out. You feel unseen. You feel hurt. And saying, I'm above them, hurts less than saying, I feel left behind. That's what defensive arrogance is. It's not about actually believing you're better. It's about protecting yourself from the pain of being vulnerable. Because if you admit you want connection, you might have to risk rejection. You might have to risk being misunderstood. You might have to be human. And after a lifetime of tying your worth to being impressive, being human can feel like failure. But here's the truth you've quietly been circling. Connection doesn't require you to be impressive. It just requires you to be present. And the moment you start to lower the wall, not all at once, but slowly, honestly, you'll begin to see you were never alone because you weren't smart enough. You were alone because you were too afraid to be seen without the armor. And the good news, you can take it off, one layer at a time. So here you are. You followed the thread this far. Through the loneliness, the pressure to be special, the isolation disguised as arrogance, and maybe now you're wondering, how do I get out of this? Well, you don't fix this by being smarter. You fix it by being braver. And the first, hardest, most necessary step, you let go of the gifted kid identity. Not because being intelligent is bad, but because basing your worth on that intelligence is a trap. When your entire value depends on being extraordinary, you start avoiding anything that makes you feel ordinary. You dodge challenges, resist growth, and stay stuck. Not because you're lazy, but because you're terrified of proving you're not who you thought you had to be. And that fear keeps you frozen. So here's the shift. You stop asking, will this make me look smart? And you start asking, will this help me grow? You trade the pursuit of perfection for the courage to be bad at things. You let yourself show up clumsy, unsure, raw, not to perform, not to impress, but to participate. Because real growth isn't about shining, it's about showing up, especially when it's messy. The old version of you needed to be special. The new version just needs to be real. And being real means you're allowed to make mistakes, to be awkward, to try and fail, to feel things deeply and not have the words for them yet. That's what being human is. And the most incredible part, when you start living from that place, you finally begin to feel seen. Not as a prodigy, not as the smartest one in the room, but as a person, a whole, imperfect, growing person. And that's where the connection begins, not because you earned it, not because you deserved it, but because you were finally willing to step down from the pedestal and walk into the real world where the rest of us live. And it turns out, that world isn't so bad. In fact, it's the only place where you'll ever feel truly at home. So if this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these words, in these wounds, drop a comment. Let me know what landed, what hurt, what finally made sense. Because chances are, you're not the only one. And sometimes, naming the pattern is the first brave step toward breaking it. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room to belong in it. You just need to be brave enough to show up, even when it's hard. And you just did. That's where it starts.